In this video, I want to define two things. Firstly, what are fractions? And secondly, what are rational numbers? Rational numbers. So the biggest question in my mind is, are both these category of numbers same or is there a difference between them? Well, let's see. So let's start with fractions. So ideally in our day-to-day language, we use fractions to mean part of something. Part of something. For example, we can take a basic example here. Let's say that I have a cake here and I divided this into two equal parts. Now, if I would choose half of it, just this portion, I can say that this part represents one part out of two parts. So this would be a fraction. Now let's say that instead of dividing into two parts, I divided this into four parts. So let's say we want to denote this portion. So this would mean one part out of these four parts, so 1 by 4. Let's say I want to denote three parts out of this part, this and this. So this would mean this three parts combined would mean three parts out of total four parts. So again, this would be a fraction. So a part of something would actually mean a fraction. We can take other examples. For example, 9 out of 11. 9 parts out of 11 parts, or let's say 22 parts out of 32 parts. So these are all fractions. But with time we have evolved and we made this definition of fractions more generic. So any two numbers when they are divided, and it can be not even numbers, it can be algebraic expressions or irrational numbers that we would learn later. If we would represent any two things in this form, we can call this a fraction. For example, even 9 negative 9 upon 12 would be a fraction. This would come under the category of negative fractions, but we would in general call this a fraction. Or let's say that we have x square plus 1 divided by 2x. So I would in a generic way call this a fraction. Or let's say that I have square root of 2 divided by 5. I can also call this a fraction. Very generic. We don't have to be very mathematical. We don't have to be mathematically precise. But anything which is represented in this form, we can generally call this a fraction. But the basic simple definition says it means, and this is what fraction means as well, part of something. So there is a debate going on actually what can differentiate a fraction and rational number, but this is what I found more interesting and more generic, and that's why I'm talking about this in this video. Rational numbers, on the other hand, are very specific. So according to the definition of rational numbers, any number that can be represented in the form of a upon b. Now the thing is, there is some specific requirements for this a and b. First, a and b should be integers. Secondly, this denominator b should not be equal to 0. If we can get any number in this form, then it would be rational number. So why don't you pause the video here and try to write few rational numbers? Well, let's see. Let's take some examples here. So let's say that I have 4 upon 9. Now 4 is an integer, 9 is an integer. First condition satisfied. And also this denominator b is 9, which is not equal to 0. Hence, this would be a rational number. Let's say that I have 42 upon 7. Integer. This denominator is not equal to 0. Hence, this would be a rational number. Let's say that I have 2. Will 2 be a rational number? Well, I can write 2 as 2 divided by 1. This would mean same thing. This is equal to 2. So this would mean, again, numerator is an integer, denominator is an integer, and this denominator is not equal to 0. Hence, this would be rational number. Let's say that I have negative 5 upon 7. Will this be a rational number? Well, in numerator we have negative 5, which is an integer. Denominator positive 7, which is also an integer and not equal to 0. Hence, this would be a rational number. Now let's say that we have 4 upon 0. Will this be a rational number? Let's see. This is integer, this is also an integer. So first condition satisfied, but denominator should not be equal to 0. Hence, this is not a rational number. Similarly, let's see a couple of more examples. I want this definition to be very clear because you would be using this later on. Let's say that I have 4.2. Will this be a rational number? Well, we'll see later how to convert a decimal into a rational number, but this is very basic. 4.2, what I can do, I can write this as 4.2 divided by 1. I can multiply numerator and denominator with 10. 4.2 times 10 is 42, and in denominator I would have 1 times 10, that is 10. Now I have converted this 4.2 as in this form, 42 divided by 10. Numerator integer, denominator integer, and denominator is not equal to 0. Hence, this would be a rational number. So I hope this definition of rational number is clear now, and you also understand what would be a basic or generic difference between a rational number and a fraction.